there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome back. This is episode 2 of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. We're going to be taking a look at the astrology for the first week of July, for the time frame from July 1st to July 7th. Now, there are 3 different astrological things that I want to speak a little bit about in this episode. First up, it's a full moon week. The full moon is in Capricorn, so I want to share a few thoughts about that. That's going to kind of naturally roll in to a little bit of a discussion about Saturn in Pisces, which is connected to the full moon, and I'll explain how in a minute. And I promised I would talk a little bit about Mercury in Cancer, so I'll do that in the latter part of the show today. Thanks again for joining me. It's great to have you here. So let's take a look at this full moon in Capricorn. The full moon is happening on Monday, July 3rd. It is happening at 11 degrees of the sign of Capricorn. And so when you're thinking about the full moon, there are some general themes, which is what I'm going to share with you today. But don't forget, you can add in what I call chart-specific themes by looking at the topics of the Capricorn house in your personal birth chart. So for those of you who are a little bit more intermediate listeners and have a copy of your birth chart, pay attention to how the area of your life where you have Capricorn, that house area, is being highlighted or illuminated during this full moon. The full moon, as I said, is happening on Monday, July 3rd. The moon will be in Capricorn for about 48 hours in total. And so even though the moment of the full moon is Monday, July 3rd, we might be feeling some of this energy and some of these themes perhaps late in the day on Sunday the 2nd and even into Tuesday the 4th of July as well. So what do we need to know about a full moon? In general, a full moon, which happens once a month or once every 4 weeks, is a time of heightened emotions. It's a time where there is lots of feeling. There's lots of kind of mood and emotional energy that is activated. Now, because this full moon is in Capricorn, which is a very pragmatic and practical sign, the feelings might not be, like tender or sensitive. There might be this sort of protective energy, but there is a peak, if you like, with the Capricorn mood energy, with the full moon in Capricorn. Now, a full moon brings illumination. And so because this is a time of peak light for the moon. And so when we're under a full moon, as we are on Monday, July 3rd, there may be a revelation. There may be a piece of insight that you get access to that isn't normally available to you. So a full moon helps you see things, you understand things. When we're under a full moon, it's like the light has been turned on and all of a sudden something makes sense because you see the fullness or the wholeness of a situation. Now, you may not necessarily like what you see. The full moon doesn't promise that there is a happiness tone, but it is promising that I will help you see it. Now, a full moon in Capricorn is promising to help you see reality. Capricorn, as the only earth sign that is ruled by the planet Saturn, is very grounded in the real, tangible world. So anything that you come to realize or that you come to understand under this full moon in Capricorn, you can trust that it is the truth or it is the realness. There is no rose-colored glasses here. You're not going to be mistaking one thing for another. Under the full moon in Capricorn, you see things clearly, you see things as they are. Now, that's a very powerful place to be in when you see something for what it is, when you see a person for who they are, when you see a situation for what it is. That really allows you to make very realistic and hopefully sustainable choices because you're under no illusions about false possibilities. You're really in that place of this is real, this is tangible, this is solid. A full moon in Capricorn does have this solid like a rock energy. So it is enduring. We can connect with things that have lasting potential, and we can decide, do we want to stick with this person, this opportunity, or this situation as it is, even if it never changes. If you're getting exactly what you need, then this full moon might be a sign to make the commitment and go forward. But if you're not feeling satisfied or you're not getting what you need, this kind of reality check with the full moon in Capricorn might be a realization that this isn't enough for you and you may not be able to continue. If this is the truth of it, this may not be right for you. So those realizations about truth and about reality are so much a part of this full moon in Capricorn. Now, to speak a little bit more about this particular full moon in Capricorn, it is closely connected to the planet Mercury. So at the time of a full moon, we always have the sun and moon in opposition. So if we're having a full moon at 11 Capricorn, that means the sun is at 11 Cancer. Now, it just so happens that at the time of the full moon on Monday, July 3rd, Mercury is very near to the sun at 14 Cancer. And so immediately after the full moon, within about 6 hours of the full moon happening, that moon interacts by opposition with Mercury in Cancer. And so this full moon, if you like, is bathed in Mercury themes. It is full of insight and information. There is a lot of desire or reflection around communication. Now, Mercury at the time of this full moon is hidden by its closeness or proximity to the sun. So these ideas and insights, these thoughts, they're inside you. There's an internal quality to Mercury. So this full moon really stimulates the mind. It activates our thinking faculties, but it may not be super communicative. And what I mean by that is because of Mercury's kind of internalized condition, partly to do with its sign placement in Cancer, which I'm going to speak about later, and partly to do with its proximity to the sun. With the moon full and interacting with Mercury, there's a lot going on inside you. Pieces are falling into place. Realizations are happening, but you're in reflection mode rather than discussion mode. What you might find really helpful for this full moon, even though it's in Capricorn, because of the influence of Mercury, you might find it really helpful to write down your thoughts, your ideas, and most importantly, your feelings. So Mercury in Cancer, the full moon interacting with that Mercury, it is a lot about those reflections and thoughts, your wonderings, where is your mind going? And the other big thing this full moon in Capricorn might activate is memories. The moon in Capricorn, Mercury in Cancer, both Cancer and Capricorn are signs that are tied to the past. They are about helping us remember what's gone before. In some instances, so we can avoid repeating that. In other instances, so we can continue what's been good about what's happened before. So that's a little bit about this full moon, some of the themes to do with it being in Capricorn, with the realizations and the reality check, but also those insights and that inner reflection with the full moon interacting with Mercury. Another important point to mention is that because the full moon is in Capricorn, that means this full moon is ruled by Saturn. And so we can get a little bit more information by taking a look at Saturn's placement at the full moon. Now, at the time of this full moon in early July 2023, Saturn is in Pisces. And so even though the full moon in Capricorn tends to have a very practical, grounded, sometimes very serious quality, there is this sort of hidden, maybe dreamy, imaginative, or creative undertone to this full moon in Capricorn because of the influence of Saturn in Pisces. So on the one hand, this full moon in Capricorn could bring up long-term goals and priorities because we know that Capricorn and the planet Saturn are not really thinking about how you get what you want today. They're actually really thinking about how you can do something today that will be a gift for your future self, that your actions or your choices today will provide you more security or protection or safety in the future. So that's definitely part of a full moon in Capricorn ruled by Saturn. But we can't just be all practical and businesslike. With the ruler of the full moon being Saturn in Pisces, there's an artistic, there's a soulful, and there's a really intuitive undertone to this full moon in Capricorn. And so when I think about Saturn in Pisces, there are two main themes that I come back to. I think about the idea of Saturn in Pisces representing the possibility of making a dream real or making a dream come true. The idea, and what I mean by that is like manifesting what's in your imagination in reality. So making our art, creating creating in the world outside us, the things that begin as a dream in your heart. So there's this concretizing creative potential with Saturn in Pisces. That's one big theme that I think about this Saturn in Pisces cycle. And then I also think about legacies. I think about things that last and things that continue to grow and increase over time. And when I think about those legacies to do with Saturn in Pisces, I think about those legacies in relation to systems and structures, particularly in society, that are designed to help provide support for those that are struggling or to help ease those who are suffering. And so I'm talking about Saturn in Pisces here because it's the ruler of this full moon in Capricorn. And so we're going to see some of these Saturn in Pisces themes popping up in this early part of July as the full moon happens in Capricorn and sort of evokes or brings forward these Saturn in Pisces themes. When I think about the creative potential of Saturn in Pisces, that idea of kind of giving concrete form to your dreams and your imagination, really there are so many people that you could draw inspiration from. One particular individual that I have found interesting to explore is that of Julie Andrews. We do have a birth chart for Julie Andrews, actress, singer, and she was born with Saturn in Pisces. So there are themes of Saturn in Pisces that are just part of her life. But in addition to that, during her first Saturn return, so when transiting Saturn had come back to Pisces and was activating the same part of the sky that it was when she was born, two of her perhaps arguably most famous or most enduringly popular creative works were released into the world. And I'm speaking about the time frame in 1964 and 1965, which is sort of two Saturn in Pisces cycles ago. We had the movie Mary Poppins come out in August of 1964 when Saturn was in Pisces. And we had the movie The Sound of Music come out in March of 1965, also with Saturn in Pisces. So that there's some interesting sort of Saturn in Pisces themes here. It's part of Julie Andrews' own personal journey to make her art real in the world during Saturn transits, particularly her Saturn in Pisces return. And then collectively, there's something about, individuals like Julie Andrews. She's not the only chart we could have used. It's just one I wanted to mention today. While we're in that collective Saturn in Pisces time frame, 1964, 1965, we're getting some of these sort of fantastical as well as musically oriented artistic works coming out into the world. And so that was just an interesting sort of alignment or synchronicity, if you like. The Sound of Music was a particular childhood favorite of mine, and I really loved the singing. I loved the family story. I mean, I did see it through the lens of a child when I first watched it, but it really helped evoke a lot of feeling. And then, of course, Mary Poppins is just this classic fantastical tale where we have real world elements and we have imagination kind of coming to life. And that's very much one part of the Saturn in Pisces mood. And so this idea of imagination coming to life is part of the Saturn in Pisces kind of story, which we want to keep an eye on in general over the next few years as Saturn goes through Pisces. But I think in particular at moments like these where we've got something happening in the sky, in this case, it's that full moon in Capricorn that is drawing on that input from Saturn in Pisces. So the other side of this idea of Saturn in Pisces is systems and structures that provide support for those that are suffering. And there's something very particular about Saturn in Pisces that ties into healthcare systems, as well as care facilities or care systems for the elderly, and also those that are terminally ill, like hospice settings, for instance. And so this idea of Saturn in Pisces bringing forward, where is the suffering? Who is suffering the most? Do we have systems and structures that are able to provide some help or ease for suffering? Now, the other piece about Saturn, of course, is that Saturn is really good at stress testing systems. And so we may see some collective conversation about how effective or functional healthcare systems are, or care systems for the elderly or the terminally ill. Are they doing what they're intended to do, or are they not functioning the way they should be? And so this idea of Saturn in Pisces maybe helping reveal where these systems of care are not functioning, and perhaps pushing towards improvements or repairs. So those systemic supports for those that need it can be more effective. And I wanted to flesh out this idea of Saturn in Pisces a little bit, because there's really a lot to this longer Saturn in Pisces theme. Saturn moved into Pisces in March of 2023. It's just been in Pisces for a few months, but we do have almost 3 years of Saturn in Pisces, right through until early 2026. So we're going to be exploring a lot more of those Saturn in Pisces themes. I'll be talking about them here. We'll be seeing them play out in our personal lives and collectively. But I thought it worth mentioning a few of them here, because I think this full moon in Capricorn is starting to bring forward some of those Saturn in Pisces themes. After all, it is the first full moon in Capricorn since Saturn has come into Pisces. So that is 2 of our 3 topics that I promised to talk about. We've got on the board so far. We've talked a little bit about the full moon in Capricorn. We've talked about that from a few points of view. We've touched on Saturn in Pisces and how that's tied to the full moon as the ruler of the full moon. Plus, we've also fleshed out some of the themes of Saturn in Pisces. The idea of making our dreams and our imagination real, and then looking at providing supports or creating some protection around suffering. And I've talked about that a little bit from a collective perspective, but I also think it's important to think about how we can be tender with ourselves around our points of suffering. As we get to know ourselves, the more we live, the more awareness we have, we do get to acknowledge that there are tender things that we are sensitive to. And Saturn in Pisces is sort of an invitation to build a relationship with those tender points, to not shy away from where we're vulnerable, but to instead make sure that we take care of that tender, vulnerable, sensitive part inside. And so the final topic I promised to speak about a little was Mercury in Cancer. And that's really important to talk through this week. Mercury, just to give you a little bit of context for this, Mercury is going to move through 3 different zodiac signs in July. So we've got this early part of July where Mercury is in Cancer. We've got the middle part of July where Mercury is in Leo. And we've got the very last few days of July where Mercury will be in Virgo. So this July, there are lots of different communication styles on offer from the cosmos. So you can experiment with different ways of exploring and expressing your ideas and your insights. And I wanted to take a look at, well, what is the Mercury in Cancer approach? So the Mercury in Cancer communication style is very quiet. In fact, Cancer is technically known as a mute sign. All the water signs, Cancer, Pisces, and Scorpio, have this mute designation. and other signs have various levels of loudness associated with them. And so Mercury in Cancer, it's so quiet that it's actually not really about talking. It's more about reflection. So with Mercury in Cancer, you might be thinking a lot, but you might not be saying much. Instead, as we mentioned before, you might be writing down how you feel. You might be mulling things over. Of course, that means there is a ruminating quality to Mercury in Cancer. We also know that Cancer is a sign that loves the past. It loves history. It loves old things. It loves vintage. It's sentimental. And so Mercury in Cancer can also be about reminiscing. Maybe your attention is being drawn back to old memories. Maybe you're curious about the past and you want to get information to help you understand the mood or the memories that you've got little wisps or inklings of. Now, we have Mercury in Cancer this whole first week of July, and we have Mercury in Cancer right up until July 11th. So this early part of July, we're kind of all in the reminiscing, ruminating, memory kind of zone. Mercury in Cancer also has a really protective and vulnerable quality. And so you really might be feeling a lot, or you might be becoming alert to the fact that you are having emotional responses to what's going on. You might be becoming aware of where and how you are sensing or experiencing emotions in your body as well. So getting insight about your emotions is something that Mercury in Cancer can help you with, even if you're not quite ready to share any of these realizations with others. Now, I wanted to share a little technical note about Mercury in Cancer. This particular iteration of Mercury in Cancer, the 2023 Mercury in Cancer cycle, is happening at the same time as the Sun is in Cancer. So we've got Mercury in Cancer and we've got the Sun in Cancer at the same time. Now, this is considered to be a helpful combination to have Mercury and the Sun in the same sign at the same time. This is because one of Mercury's roles is to act as a spokesperson for the Sun. And it's easier for Mercury to transmit the information or insight from the Sun when it is in the same sign as the Sun. So from now until July 11, when we've got Mercury in the Sun, speaking on behalf of the Sun from the same place as the Sun, during this time, you might get these insights, or that you might get a much greater understanding about your past, about your family, about the role that your history has played in your journey. There may be some links that you're starting to see between your history and your past and your identity, your sense of expressiveness or lack thereof at this point in your journey. You might also gain some insight about your needs or about what safety, security, and protection look like for you. Cancer is a nurturing sign. It's a sign of tending to that which is vulnerable or needs a little bit of extra support, in the same way that a caring adult might attend to the needs of a young child. And so with Mercury in Cancer, our thoughts and our minds really turn to our experiences with nurturing. And you might find it helpful to reflect on questions like, how do I nurture and care for myself? You might also ask yourself, what are safe and sustainable ways for me to nurture and care for my loved ones? And safe and sustainable is really important to the Cancer pathway. I want to do this in a way that I'm going to feel safe, that I'm not going to be outside my comfort zone. And I want to do this in a way that it's sustainable, that I'm not overextending myself, that I can keep this up for a period if that's what is required. You might also even ask yourself whether or not you're trying to pour all that nurturing, caring energy towards someone or something who may not want your care and protection. So this Mercury in Cancer cycle can be really thought-provoking about exploring the ways that we nurture self and others, and to bring some insight into how we can nurture and care for self and others in more lasting or ongoing ways, more manageable ways, we might say. So they are a few thoughts about some of the astrology events of this first week of July. It is a pretty big week. The full moon is always a featured moment in astrology, and I love how it's tying us all into that longer trend of Saturn in Pisces, which so many of us are really still tuning into because it's only been a few months. And then it is a week where we've got Mercury in Cancer. So there are some very particular themes to do with Mercury in Cancer and needs and nurturing and reflection. And that's really just available for this early part of July because next week Mercury's into Leo and on to something different. I'll be back to share some tips for the second week of July next weekend. If you can't wait till then and you want even more details about every astrological event happening, I invite you to join my astrology membership. You can register for that and join the community right now over on my website, kellysastrology.com. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you next week.